And we are live. How are we doing, sir?
Doing all right. How you doing?
I am doing all right. What am I doing? I am in the last week, basically, of the farm season. So, what'll happen is this is actually the first year we start running hay rides. And so, this will be the last
Oh yeah.
weekend for, yeah, this will be the last weekend for that for sure. And then, everything otherwise through the winter, we usually, because we've got a little farm store, so we'll end up doing like Black Friday specials or whatever and doing that. But then otherwise, it's all by appointment only. So
Mm-hmm.
yep, so
Okay.
that's where we're at right now. How about yourself? You busy in it? Is it still hot? You still dealing with all that, or you guys getting able to slow
It's
down at this point?
it's cool. Yeah, I mean it's cooling down here somewhat. Yeah,
Good, good.
I think I've said this on X a few times. I live on the Gulf Coast now, so
Oh,
it
all right.
stays it stays warm, and it's but like we're starting to get mid 50s in the mornings. It still warms up to the 80s, but it's starting to at least be cool in the mornings. So
Yes, fair enough.
yep.
Well, good. All right. So I brought you on here tonight because it, in a perfect world, if I'm looking at it into the future, I've had somebody who's been from every state. So far, I've had Mr. Patriarch on. He was on here talking about Alaska, talking about Alaskan
Mm-hmm.
history, and then different things that went on with that. And then just this past week, I had a fellow named Arthur and Callie, and he was on. He's originally from Texas and was explaining that he's hoping to get back out there here in the next
Yep.
several years. And so I said, well, let me keep trying to find. And so I've got some other states lined up right now. And you've been on X. I've seen you a lot talking about the great state of Kentucky. And so as I'm
Mm-hmm.
going through trying to find different folks, you were an obvious choice for Kentucky, which frankly, uh, I think the nation probably has a lot of myth about the idea of Kentucky, but I don't know that it's that well known of a state. So I'm going to
Yeah.
hand the mic off to you and just sort of let you monologue if that sounds good, and
Okay.
give us an introduction to Kentucky. What its history is, and sort of I guess what it means to you to go with that sort of goober fifth grade idea. What does your state mean to you? But
All
yeah,
right.
go ahead and
Well,
take it away, sir.
okay. Uh yeah, I think what you said about how Kentucky there's almost a mythic urban legend kind of side to Kentucky. I think a lot of that unfortunately is negative because people think of Kentucky as just a bunch of dumb hicks or as a bunch of moonshiners or as a bunch of everybody's related to each other, and I'm not saying that there isn't truth to all that because there is some, but Kentucky does have a very rich history. And when we go home to visit, when I take my wife and my kids up there, my wife has a background in history, like she has degrees in it, and so she's always on the lookout for any kind of historical settlements, any kind of major points of history, even minor points of history. And we have, even just going home to visit, have discovered so much history and that even I wasn't aware of when I lived there, when I grew up there. So most people think of Kentucky, they think of the state starting with Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone actually wasn't the first European to explore Kentucky. There was another one that came a little before him. His last name was Herod. And Herod, he set up his last name was not spelled like the Bible name, but he set up a fort in what's now called Harrodsburg. Harrodsburg is almost in the exact middle of the state. So where Boone's fort was off to the southeast, a little bit closer to the state line, but Harrodsburg is like right in the middle. And this is the first settlement in the state. Boone came a little later. And so when these men came in, they started pulling settlers in from the east. Louisville is also a pretty old settlement. It was a trading town on the Ohio River. I think Louisville is about as old as the country itself. I think in the 1770s is when Louisville was founded. So Kentucky has always been it's got equal parts people who want to stay and put down roots and call it home, but it's also a state where people kind of just go through it. So we don't have a lot of people. We've only got about 5 million people, I think. Last I checked. Um, but
Yeah, so
Kentucky
less
has
than 1% of the.
yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
small population, but but somehow it has kind of left its mark on in American culture. You know, I mean, think of things like the Kentucky Derby. Think of things like Kentucky bourbon. You know, these are things people do think about. We know about them, but people don't really know the state. Um, I grew up in the area. I grew up in central Kentucky. I grew up in a town called Elizabethtown. Same name as the movie that came out about 20
That's what
some
I was
years
going to
ago.
ask you. That
Yeah,
the one with the Orlando Bloom or what? Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, same movie, same town, and we call it E Town. And E Town, it was built in like the 1790s. It's an old town. In fact, there is a Civil War battle site in E Town. It's a very small one, but in downtown, if you go up to, there's a little cemetery hill, and there is a cannon. It's not the original cannon. That one fell apart a long time ago. But there's like a little memorial to a cannon that's up in the middle of that cemetery hill, and it's pointed right down at the square. And there is a cannonball that is still lodged in the side of one of the buildings. It did not explode. So there is an original cannonball from the Civil War. It's actually, I think it's a Union ball, because I think the Union was encamped up on the hill. And so you can go there, and there's like a little marker there with a little arrow pointing up at it. My great uncle was a chaplain in the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and he was there at the the 150th anniversary when they rededicated the little memorial plaque to that ball. If you go, so it's like, uh, okay, go back out towards Harrodsburg. So the capital of the state is in Frankfort. Frankfort is pretty close to Lexington. Lexington is one of the two big cities in the state. You know, Louisville over on the river, Lexington in the middle. Frankfort is pretty close to Lexington. Beautiful town. Um, Even though Frankfort is the capital, if you go just a little off to the west of there to a little town called Danville. Danville is very close to Harrodsburg. Inside in Danville, there is a little park called Constitution Square, because the state constitution for Kentucky entered the Union, I think, in 1798. They actually drafted the state constitution in Danville. And so you can still go there. They still have the cabin where they met and they drafted it and signed it. There is a whole little monument park there for all the governors that have served in the state. It's real pretty. Back over in Harrodsburg, they've actually completely rebuilt the fort it had. I mean, the original fort was torn down over a century ago, because people used it for probably 2 centuries ago, because people were using it for building supplies. So decades ago, they rebuilt it exactly as it looked. So you can go there and see that too. Um, Over time, Kentucky developed along regional lines. So, a lot of time you and I were kind of mentioning this in the pre-show about North and South. Kentucky not only has that, it also split along East and West. So there is very much an Eastern Kentucky, there is very much a Central Kentucky, and there is very much a Western Kentucky. So if you're over in Eastern Kentucky, centered around like Pikeville, that's pretty different than if you come over to Central Kentucky, which is where like Louisville and Lexington and places like that are. And then you go over west, you start hitting Bowling Green, and then even further west out to Paducah. These are very different sections. We're all Kentucky, and there's parts of it that are very similar, but it's not all just one homogenous state.
Yeah.
And like out east, they're much more inclusive. They're much more, like what you think of mountain folk. They're not as welcoming of outsiders and much more wary. In the central part of the state, we tend to be just more farmers and just planters and things like that. But um, I don't know what else. What else would you like me to say about the? What else would you like me to talk about with the history of the state?
No,
You
you're
want to go
fine.
into
That was
just
a good intro. I think one of the things, and you were hitting on this. There's definitely north south divide in there, but I
yeah,
also think uh, there's an east west divide, and so I appreciate you digging into the regions. I do want to come back to that, but
yeah,
sort of what we're talking about, and you correct me if I'm wrong. Almost like Kentucky was this frontier state, and so you had
yes,
a lot of movement coming from the east through it, and so we get to
yeah,
somebody like Daniel Boone, and he's not even from Kentucky, and frankly, I think you did mention
right.
this. He didn't even stay there, and so
No, he didn't.
a lot of the ideas of things that it was almost a transient stop. I want to say out west. Oh, where am I thinking? There is. I remember I was on a trip one time and I had gone out to. Is it Hinder? It might be Henderson. There is a place where. What am I thinking? James Audubon. He
Uh huh.
spent time out in Western Kentucky, and I'll try and find
Yep.
that during this show. But the idea, whether it was Audubon, whether it was Daniel Boone, these men were passing through, and to stop and stay in Kentucky, they were either dealing prior to coal mining and all of that. They were either dealing with Appalachian, with the mountains, and it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
a big deal having to live in the mountains and deal with that,
Yeah.
or they're setting down roots in what is basically a frontier town in the
Yeah.
late 18th century, and so it's dealing with that, and it's like, well, do we stay here because we don't really have anything out here, and we could just keep on moving. Which, frankly, if I remember the myths on Daniel Boone at all, it was that idea: if I could see somebody else's smoke from their chimney, that's too
Yeah.
close. That's too many folks. And so you saw a lot of those people that they'd come in, they'd get done whatever needed to be done, and then they'd just keep on moving. And I
Mm-hmm.
think part of that was the hardness of the state of Kentucky itself. There's some
Yeah.
things that could be said about the various tribal nations that were there. In general, no, that's too general. I was going to say in general they weren't too bad, but then what was it? Was it Fort Daniel Boone? I think that got a well that wasn't the name at the time, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Daniel Boone was involved in it, and I want to say 10-day siege by the Shawnee. Maybe I might be wrong on
Yeah.
that,
It
but
would have been the Shawnee. That was the biggest tribe.
okay,
That was
yeah,
in the air. That was the biggest tribe there. I mean, Kentucky. There's debate as to what the name even means. Some people say
mm,
that Kentucky. It's an Iroquois word. Some people say that it means like a good harvest land, and then others say that it means dark and bloody ground. And I think I haven't seen any scholarship one way or the other that says one is more right than one. Um, Wendell Berry in his book The Unsettling of America, he talks about the nature of the frontier in America. So in the east, on the east coast, you have these very well developed, entrenched communities and states, because for the longest time, because of the way the colonial powers were working in North America, English settlers couldn't necessarily move that far east because they'd run into Spanish powers or French powers. And so in the east, you have this very deeply rooted sense of this is my home, we're going to cultivate this. But then as the frontier began to open up, people began to move out west. And Barry talks about how we became a nation of movers instead of a nation of stayers. And so, like you were saying, we just kind of we'd stay for a while and then we'd move on. And then we'd stay for a while and then we'd move on. And this is how we conquered the whole West. Um, Daniel Boone is well known, for saying his "I need elbow room." I think he ended up and died in Missouri. Is as far west as he got. He is buried in
yes,
Kentucky. If you
right.
go to Frankfort at the state cemetery, there's a big old monument to Daniel Boone, like right in the middle. And he's buried there. But yeah, Kentucky has that notion of it's like there was a lot of people that stayed, but I think there was a lot more people that moved through. Kentucky is the frontier state. It was the first frontier state. We were the first. Vermont was number 14, but after that, we were the first state west of the Appalachians, and it's still it's okay. I don't know if everybody's seen our flag. Our flag has our state crest on it, and it shows two men. It shows a man dressed in colonial clothes like a businessman, and he's shaking hands with a man dressed in buckskins. And this was supposed to evoke a symbolism that Kentucky is a meeting of the frontier with civilization. That we were going to be that place where they work together. And you can see that if you go into the older towns of the state, like E-Town, Bardstown, Frankfort, Danville, places like this that have the old historic town squares, it looks just like what you would see in the Carolinas and Virginia, especially Virginia. And it has an old style colonial American feel, because this is what they were trying to, the ones who stayed, they were trying to remember that. They were saying, no, this is where we come from, this is what we're bringing here. But if you go outside the towns, it's very rural. Even to this day, it's very rural. It's you just drive outside city limits and immediately you're hitting farms.
Yeah.
There are very few suburbs and stuff like that. It's so that whole notion of frontier is still there. There's still a lot of people that don't want to be able to see their neighbors.
So it is. I mean, not to pick on him, and frankly, this is actually a good time too to say J.D. Vance's book. I thought his Hillbilly Elegy. So I read this
Uh-huh.
back before. Man, it had already been published in 2019. I think. I'm pretty sure I read it either in 2018 or 2019, and with my limited experience with Eastern Kentucky, with that whole Appalachian region out there, it seemed awfully fair. And I will say too that uh, different things with another part of the family. I spent a fair bit of time in, let's call it, Southern Appalachia. If we want to say that Virginia is Virginia was a southern state. Anyways,
Yeah.
I think you can cut Appalachia into Southern Appalachia, Northern Appalachia, uh,
Yes.
just the same as you can cut the states. But I don't know that the Mason-Dixon line is necessarily the best place to put it. Regardless,
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
I've been up and down the Appalachians a little bit, and Eastern Kentucky is by far the most amount of outhouses I have ever
Yes.
seen, and the
Uh-huh.
most amount of, when you talk about electricity in a house, it's not exposed wire, and frankly, I'm not an electrician. Oh, what is that? Oh shoot, what's the the actual electrical wiring, not the copper, but the anyways. What you will
Uh,
go into houses and you will find the electric running across the wall, stapled onto the
yeah.
outside of the wall.
Uh-huh.
And that's just because in that part of Kentucky, even more so than that part of the country, because
Mm-hmm.
in most places in, say, North Carolina, you're not going to see that.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, whatever groups had decided to settle in Kentucky, or however hard it was to actually get the power and get the utilities up there, it is just
Mm-hmm.
a different sort of life out on Eastern Kentucky. It's a different group of people.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There
which I mean,
some
usually as long as you don't insult their family and you could talk reasonably well
yeah.
about coonhounds or chickens, like, you're fine.
Yeah, generally
But
speaking.
yeah,
It's somehow if you look at the map and you see Kentucky right there in the middle. Somehow, for some reason, it seems like the whole country just kind of went around the state. Because up north of it, you got Ohio, Indiana, Illinois,
yeah,
and I mean, I know Indiana is still a very rural state. My mom grew up in Indiana, so I know Indiana is still
okay,
pretty rural.
sure,
But you got Ohio, you got Cincinnati and Cleveland. Indiana, you got Indianapolis, of course. Illinois, very big population. South of it, you got Tennessee, which Tennessee is like the more It's like the wealthier cousin of Kentucky. You
Yeah,
know,
that's
because
an
you got
interesting, because I was thinking, how do we get into the Tennessee is clearly a southern state. It it
yes,
is it is a member of the Confederacy. Now,
yep,
without getting into all the nuance of, yes, Kentucky never declared or anything, um,
yeah,
there is, but there is southern influence in parts of Kentucky,
yes.
and then there's also, yeah, see,
There is a northern
mountain
influence too.
folk is almost, there's almost what, I'm sorry.
No, there's the Appalachian influence out east.
Yeah,
There is southern influence because of Tennessee and Virginia. Because I mean, Kentucky was a county of Virginia, and
yeah,
then there is also a northern influence,
yeah,
and it all mixes together. Kentucky is very much its own thing, and
yeah.
that's
I think
why,
you're right.
yeah. If you
And
ask somebody from back home if they're southern or not, they're more than likely just tell you they're from Kentucky.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's I'm from Kentucky, and that's the way it is, and I'm proud of that fact. You know.
Yep. Because one of the other things that, frankly, it doesn't get mentioned that often, but when we talk about northern influence,
Hmm.
what should be clear is that if you go and look at the state borders, that northern border is the
Hmm.
Ohio River.
Yes, it is.
That greater area, when you talk about the Ohio River Valley,
Hmm.
you've got, say, Cincinnati and Louisville and
Yep.
most of the northern parts of Kentucky, and you're running all the way out to southern Illinois, and so there is this weird mishmash
Yeah.
of people groups that are there,
Hmm.
of dynamics of, are we dealing with mountains, are we dealing with the river, and then a lot of folks that, how did we ship goods, how did the merchants move things
Yep.
200 years ago? Well, the same way we
Yes.
do nowadays, along the water. And
Yes.
so it does
Especially
it.
The
Yes,
Ohio is a
it
massive
mixed in.
waterway. Yeah.
Hmm.
My
Yep.
dad, he's been to where the Ohio and the Mississippi come together, and I've heard him say many times the Ohio is a much wider, bigger river than the Mississippi. And he says the way it looks when they come together, to him, it always looked like the Ohio was the bigger river.
Just drank up the Mississippi.
Yeah, that's the way it always came across to him. And you're right, because you got Cincinnati and Louisville, which these are not the same people, obviously. But then you go further down the river, you hit Owensboro. And Owensboro is a
Mhm.
very different place than even what Louisville is, and it's still in the same state, but it's
Yeah.
not the same subculture. Owensboro, yeah, it's very much heavy bluegrass music, and it's very much this. Was Louisville is much more metropolitan. It's much more businesses, and it's a city, obviously.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Because that's where, let's see, Louisville, you've got Papa John's coming out of there.
Uh
You've
huh.
got the Yum Brands Arena.
Yep.
And that I want to say also is where most of your federal buildings in the state are. And
A
then,
lot of them.
uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I've passed through, I'm trying to think. I think I've been through Frankfurt once,
Yeah.
and it's
Hmm.
exactly what you were describing earlier. It is compared to Louisville, it is a dot on the map.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
Frankfurt is a beautiful town, but it's tiny.
yeah.
And they and I could be remembering this wrong, but from what I've read, Frankfurt was never intended to be a full independent like community like Danville or Bardstown. Frankfurt was intended to be the state capital. They built it for that purpose. And
Okay.
that's one reason why it's never really expanded into its own. I mean, it's got businesses there and shops, but it's very much a place of government and history.
Okay.
There's a fantastic bookstore there, by the way, called Poor Richard's. It's a
Okay.
wonderful bookstore. But uh, yeah, the where you're talking about like north and stuff and south, I've sometimes expressed this on for that Kentucky in some ways is the northernmost southern state, but
Yes.
it's not a perfectly southern state. Like you were talking about Tennessee. Tennessee is 100% southern. Like you cannot
Yes.
argue that Tennessee is anything but south.
So
Just
I've heard something from a Tennessee boy, and I'll throw it back to you and see what you think. So this
yeah,
particular one was a fella by the name of Jay Dyer. You ever heard of him?
I do know who he is. Yes.
But- right. Yeah, I can't even remember what he was talking about, what the primary thrust of the stream was, but he was talking in Kentucky came up, and he said, "Don't ever let anybody fool you into thinking that Kentucky's a southern state." He said Kentucky is a northern state that LARPs as a southern state, and I thought that was a
Well,
funny description.
he's wrong, but
Okay.
it's I can see why he's saying that. But yes, I firmly disagree with him. And the I think a lot of it though is that like you and I were like you were kind of pointing out earlier, it's not perfectly southern, and there's almost a dividing line right around. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the map of the state where they know where Bowling Green is. If you go a little bit north of Bowling Green, it is where it's actually during the war. Um, Multiple counties of Kentucky did try to secede after the state government kind of put their foot down and said, "No, we're not joining the South." There were quite a few counties that did try to secede, and they centered around Bowling Green. Bowling Green became the provisional capital of the Confederate state of Kentucky. So that southern western part of the state is very southern. Um, but yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say it's universal across the whole state. But no,
Yeah.
I do take issue with people saying that there is definitely a heavy southern. We come from Virginia,
Yeah.
and Virginia is the. I mean, I wouldn't. I know it's not anymore, but
Sure.
throughout most of American history, Virginia was the preeminent southern state.
Oh,
I
I
mean, this
mean,
is
if you go
where
out to Richmond, do you ever go out down along Monument Avenue in Virginia?
I have never been to Richmond. We went to Colonial Williamsburg about 3 summers ago, but we
Okay.
did not make it to Richmond.
So various events caused me. I've lived in both Richmond and Charlottesville for different
Okay.
periods of my life, and in either place, you are. It, well, in Charlottesville, it's kind of funny because it's like they try to get away from it and they try to get around it,
Yeah.
and you can't.
Yeah.
This is the high South. This
Yeah.
is the pearl of the Confederacy to some degree.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I mean Virginia. Have you seen that documentary that Abbeville Institute put out called Virginia? I think it's called Virginia First,
no.
or it's a
Is it about Lee?
no, not entirely. Oh, what's it
Okay.
called? I think it's called Virginia First, the 1607 Project,
Okay.
and it was made as a response to that whole 1619 project,
Sure.
and because they had made that 1619 thing, and then Hillsdale came out with their 1776 project. And
Okay.
so Abbeville and Brian McClanahan, they came out with this whole documentary called the 1607 Project, trying
Yes.
to historically root the founding of America to Jamestown. And
Okay.
it's a fascinating documentary. And it really does show how heavily involved, how in the beginning there was two parts to the nation. There was the New England and there was the South. And these were almost these were two separate cultures. And
Yes.
so that culture in Virginia, Kentucky stems from that. So to
Mm.
say that Kentucky is not Southern, well, then what do you call Virginia? Because Kentucky comes from Virginia.
Yeah.
When
Well,
we drove through Virginia, it was like I felt like I was home.
it
This
is
was like
a.
Grandpa's house. It's like,
I was gonna say, well, and so it's fair enough to say, and I think I've said this before to different people that uh, you know doing these as states might be the worst way to do it, but frankly, it's also the easiest way to do it
it
because when
is.
you have a
Yes.
state, you have a contained area. But any given state that I've been to has at least two different regions in it, two different major cultures,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
so it's the same way in Kentucky. And then I'm thinking in Virginia, if you go into that, hmm, so that Cumberland Gap area, and that is a Man, that is not so. The Virginia we were just talking about 30 seconds ago
Mhm.
with Charlottesville and Richmond and all that. That is
Yeah.
not the Cumberland Gap area. The Cumberland
Mhm.
Gap area, I don't care which state you're in, as long as you're in that tri state area of the Cumberland Gap, you're getting Appalachian
Yes.
life. Yep,
Mhm.
and it is the exact same whether you're in the Kentucky portion or the Virginia portion, just like
This
you're
is
talking
true.
about. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think and so it does it makes an interesting argument. So unfortunately, the map I found that I think most easily presents some of what we're talking about. It's not super high resolution, but if you all look on here and see this little red car, it's supposed to be a Corvette.
Oh yeah.
Reason being that for the longest time, Degum GM, they had a manufacturing plant outside of Bowling Green, and that well, actually, that might still be the only place they produce the Corvettes.
it's
I
still
don't
a main
remember.
it's still a main place they do. Yes, I think they
Okay.
have started to produce some other places, but that is still one of the main spots. Is there in Bowling Green?
Okay.
Hmm.
Gotcha. So here's a question for you. I'm going to ask this because there's actually two Bowling Greens. So
Hmm.
let's see. Midwit jumped on her and he said, "Didn't Bowling Green have a college football team that made some shocking leap in quality for a brief season a decade or more ago?" Does that sound at all familiar to you? Because I've got something in the back of my head. I'm wondering.
I mean, I know Western Kentucky University is in Bowling Green. I don't keep up with their program at all.
Yeah.
They're kind of a joke in the state. Um,
I'm wondering if he's talking about Bowling Green University up in Ohio.
he might be. I haven't heard anything good come out sports wise out of the Hilltoppers. So
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
well, now
there's
Western that's an interesting subject to get into because I think Western Kentucky that's no, that's not true. I was going to say I think they're primarily the ag institution in the state, but that's not true because all the extension offices I want to say run through University of Kentucky, just like up in Ohio, they all run
yep.
through the
UK
Ohio State University. Yeah,
exactly. UK is a massive agricultural school.
yeah,
Started as the Kentucky is it started out as Kentucky, I think A&E, and it's okay. This is interesting. If you go to Lexington, you can go see Henry Clay's house called Asheville. When Henry Clay died, he actually willed the house to the state because he wanted it used for educational purposes. So, University of Kentucky started as the Kentucky Agricultural School, actually started in Henry Clay's house. Now, later on, it did revert back to his family because they outgrew it, and so they wanted to preserve it because it was Clay's house. So they did revert back to his family, and you can go see it now. But that University of Kentucky was kind of born out of his house, and they are a massive agricultural school.
yeah. Well, and so that's just a quick tributary. One of the things, guys, if any of you ever plan on getting into any sort of agriculture or whatever, what will happen is usually, I'm trying to think, I think all 50 of our states have a decent school when it comes to agriculture. There's usually a
Yeah, I
state
would assume so.
university.
Hmm.
Yeah. So in Ohio, it's the Ohio State University. In Kentucky, it's UK.
Yep.
And let me think.
And
In Michigan, I actually I want to say Michigan is Michigan State, but I might be off. And then like up in New York, I'm pretty sure it's Cornell. Anyways, what
hmm
happens is that the premier ag institution in the state sets up with the USDA usually. They usually
hmm
share a building and they're right next to one another. But what will happen is that they're called county extension offices is so in these county extension offices they are going to be the place where you take in soil samples. They're going to be the place where you find out about whatever opportunities the county is offering, the state is offering, and then how that plugs into the USDA, the NRCS, the different equip programs. So anything to do with agriculture, figure out where your county extension office is and what the
hmm
primary state institution is, and that's going to get your feet off the ground. Oh yeah, I like this one. In Texas, it's A&M. So fair enough.
Yeah, in Florida, it's FSU, Florida State,
Okay,
and
Seminoles.
yep,
Is that right?
yep, hmm
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Well, very good. Yeah. So there was that. I forgot about the Corvettes. That was the an industry. What's your knowledge sort of on the industry within Kentucky? Where has it been? Where's it going? Is it primarily an ag state? Is it primarily coal mining? What is Kentucky competing with?
Kentucky still, to my knowledge, Kentucky still has a good agricultural export. Uh, Coal mining has been on the downturn. I know, like back when Trump in his first term, it kind of was coming back up, and then when Biden came in, it tanked again. Um, Coal mining's not as big as it used to be. There's, a lot of, there some problems that developed because of that. I personally think a lot of the coal mining out east has contributed to a lot of the flooding problems. Um, but yeah, agriculture's still a big part. We're a big manufacturing state. A lot of, like, if you go back, especially in the middle of the state, you driving up I-65, you'll see a lot of new factories being built. There's a ton of manufacturing back home. Most of my family back home works in factories and producing car parts, producing machining, things like that. That's a big part of the state now, and they export those things. But yeah,
Fair
there are
enough.
still good. There's still good bit of agriculture, but um, of course, in the South, cotton, of course, was the big plant. Tobacco was also a major export. In Kentucky, tobacco was the biggest. I mean, tobacco was the biggest crop. It was everywhere. Um, Both sides of my family, you go back a couple of generations to my great grandparents, both sides of my family, that's all they grew was backer. Like my great grandfather on my mom's side, he had a 400-acre farm that he grew backer, and my great grandfather on my dad's side had an 800-acre farm, and pretty much all he grew was backer, and that's what
Yeah.
everybody did.
Now, one of the things as we're talking about this was back during the quota system. Is so
Yeah,
do you have much knowledge on that? Can you explain to anybody what that meant and what it meant to get a hold of land? Because you couldn't just go out and plant tobacco. Is that the correct understanding?
I am still studying up on that. I
Okay,
have
fair
learned a
fair
little
enough.
bit. Yeah, I've been learning more, like things like the Burley Tobacco Cooperative, things like that. It was designed because a lot of people were taking advantage of Kentucky tobacco farmers, and so this in the state, there was several people that got together and they formed this massive cooperative. And basically, from what I understand, it was a thing of, it was almost like a union. It was like, we will take care of you, but if you're going to grow tobacco in Kentucky, you're going to have to be part of our co-op. Which I don't have a problem with. This is not a government thing. This is people getting together and doing this, and it did work for a while. They were able, basically they were able to protect people's the prices they were getting, because they it kept people from getting shorted on the crops, and helped them to make sure that they earned at least some profit. Um, but as far as like land use and stuff like that, I'm still studying on that.
Yeah, fair enough. So Connor Dillon asked an interesting question. He says, "Is there many railways in Kentucky? What sort of is the train situation up in Kentucky?"
I'd say it's like most eastern states. We do have railways, especially for um just hauling goods and stuff like that. Passenger trains, not so much. Um, I think there could be something like that in Louisville, but yeah, there's not really much along the lines of passenger trains. Like I grew up pretty close to a railway, so we do still haul stuff that way, like lumber and chemicals and stuff like that. But I wouldn't say it's anything different than most other southern states.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as far as I know, and what do I know? I'm thinking primarily of the east, and I'm sure there's some shipping with railways,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking the Ohio River for one thing. The boating, the barges would probably take
Hmm.
up a big portion of the commercial shipping, and then going through the mountains, it's got to be what am I thinking?
It's most
Semis, truck drivers.
it's mostly trucks. Yeah.
Yeah.
There, yeah, there's still a lot of trucking back home. And
Okay.
my I have three of my cousins are truckers, and so it's still a big thing back home. That's mostly how you get around is doing on the roads. But I mean, we do have trains, and we do still
Yeah.
haul things that way.
Okay.
But it's not everywhere.
Sure. Yep. Fair enough. Well, good. So we've gone that. Tobacco, I think we could do a whole stream on. We won't do that tonight. We won't dig into it too much, but I think you could. When it came out, my understanding, and I'm probably off on this in different parts. My understanding is that the federal tobacco bill came out in 2004, and then
Hmm.
the big states, including Kentucky, I
Yeah.
know for sure it was Kentucky. I don't remember if it was North Carolina, but what happened was there was a tobacco buyout program that lasted
Yeah.
about 10 years, I want to say. And so
Hmm.
that was the rightly or wrongly, that was the chance that folks had. And so not that they had an opportunity, uh, not that they had a choice. That's a better way to phrase it. Not that they had a choice, but that was the opportunity for the state to move in a different agricultural area. And
Yeah.
North Carolina did that. I want to say with sweet potatoes is what I had found out. And then Kentucky, on the other hand, as I saw it, they didn't seem to pivot to anything too much because prior to the tobacco bill, they had the largest beef herd east of the
Yeah.
Mississippi,
Hmm.
and so I found that fascinating. But then what didn't happen post tobacco bill, there was no increase in the size of the beef herd. And so I have some guesses on why maybe that was the case. Frankly, for those not in the know, tobacco was a see now if I say golden ticket, that comes out wrong. Like oh, Kentucky
Yeah.
just won. It was the silver bullet might be the better way to.
Hmm.
Tobacco was the silver bullet for the growing conditions and the agricultural
Yes, it was.
externalities that Kentucky was dealing with.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, it seems like post tobacco bill, the Kentucky agricultural system has not been able to figure out if there is a pivot, and we can see that in the beef herd in Kentucky
Yeah.
staying more or less the same size since before the tobacco bill. And so even though they still have the biggest beef herd east of the Mississippi, it hasn't grown in any real sense since the tobacco bill. And that's
Mhm.
unfortunate to me, just messing with farms and trying to do the whole agricultural thing.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's dairy farms in Wisconsin or whether it's the tobacco bill, and then that lack of a pivot in Kentucky. I hate seeing agriculture struggle within a given
Oh, I
state.
know. I think if I remember correctly, the biggest crop that we took over after tobacco is soybean. There is quite a bit of soybean farming, at least where I'm from.
Okay,
There's soybean
yeah.
farms everywhere. I mean, and corn too. But
Now, is this beyond production for the cattle in Kentucky? Do you know?
that I don't know. I
Yeah,
hadn't thought
fair
about it
enough.
that way. I know that yeah, like there have been initiatives. Okay, so I mentioned his name earlier. I do not know
Windleberry.
how. Yeah, I don't know how
Okay.
familiar you are with him or with
It's
his work.
Paquito.
Okay, so
I am
his
aware of him.
his daughter, who I actually met a couple of years ago, surprisingly, they they operate up in northern Kentucky around in Henry County. They operate a place called the Berry Center, and the Berry Center is an institution that tries to incorporate what he's written about into real life practice, as far as like sustainability and agriculture and things like that. And so The Burley Tobacco Co-op, I think one of the men who founded that was actually Wendell Berry's dad. And so his daughter, she's tried to take the spirit, the essence of the Burley tobacco, but applied it to beef because they also saw the problem that, like you were pointing out with beef production in the state. And so they do a thing called our home place meat. And it's basically a cooperative with cattle farmers in the area that, as long as you're raising cattle sustainably and humanely, you're not doing industrially, like they're able to they're pasture fed and things like that, they'll guarantee that they can get you the highest and best prices available. And so it's getting bigger. They're slowly trying to work that into the state, trying to get more people involved with it statewide. I think it's still pretty focused in that general area up in the northern part, but they're trying to get it, to spread throughout the state because they really, I think they see beef as our they want to get that built back up.
Very good. Yeah, I know. So dad's family came out of deep Midwest, deep Great Lakes, and
Okay,
so growing up, the whole idea when it came to unions was that these were a bunch of whiners that wanted to keep pushing and pushing just so they could get a little bit more. Now,
sure.
that I think maybe growing up, like I said, in the Great Lakes area, that's potentially that's a fair enough understanding of some of the things that were going on. But boy, when you
Yeah.
move down into Kentucky and you see, like you were talking about with the co-op, and then different things that were going on with the coal industry,
Hmm.
you would have to be awfully hard or hard, I think, to not think that these unions out there in Kentucky and some other southern areas were doing something worthwhile
Right.
because
Yeah.
the infrastructure to build a mine is unbelievable.
Yes, it is.
The cost to get that manufacturing, that mining operation up to snuff is unbelievable. And
Hmm.
so from a purely efficiency standpoint, you can understand the whole company store and all that, but it turned into an ugly, nasty situation. And frankly, it's a you know what I was walking it. I was walking the dog slowly at one point, but I'll just embrace it and say the unions, to some degree, in the state of Kentucky, and the co-ops, and frankly, the vigilante law enforcement officers in different parts were a great boon to those states that were involved
Hmm.
in some of those industries. And so
I think. Yeah.
it's unfortunate that post the tobacco bill, the quota system, and all that
Yeah.
there's almost this. Well, if I got really ugly about it, there is a business first.
Yeah.
There is a business first culture that's coming in that
Hmm.
I don't know that Kentucky and some of the other states are prepared for.
They're not. It's a
Yeah.
promise. It's the promise of better paying jobs and better economy. And
Okay.
no, I don't think there's anything wrong, obviously. And okay, let me rephrase that. There is everything right with wanting to pay someone a fair wage. That is what you should do. And there is everything right with wanting to be paid for the hard work you've put in. The problem is, and you were kind of hitting on this, the problem is that that's all we think there is now. Is, oh, it doesn't matter what these new businesses that are coming in are doing to our community. It doesn't matter what it's doing to our membership. I'm making better money now. Yeah, but it's a company that has nothing to do with where it has nothing to do with where you're from. It's
That's a great point. That's a
the
huge point.
corporations,
Keep
and
digging in.
yeah, yeah, it's the corporation. They're based out in California or New York or good, God knows India, and it's they don't know you. Back in the day, And I could take you to places like this back home. They're gone now, unfortunately. But back in the day, you could go down to the local store and you knew the person owned it. They went to church with you, or your grandpa knew them. They grew up together, things like that. You go to the gas station. Like I knew the man who owned like the two men that they where I'm from, there was these two gas stations, did the whole like gas wars kind of thing. You know, that you wake up to see, okay, whose gas price is lower today. You knew both men. One his name was Sam, and the other one his name was Mr. Pence. He was an older man. You knew them. You could go into the gas station and talk to the owner. But nowadays, you don't know. I mean, it's just Walmart, Dollar General. I mean, my where I'm from is literally there is not a town. It is in between two tiny towns. And for the longest time, the only businesses that were there were two gas stations, a pawn shop right down the road, the business my grandfather owns, and that was it. It was all the rest of it was just houses and fields. And then for some reason, about 6, 7 years ago, I think it was pre-COVID, 6, 7 years ago, they built a Dollar General right there in the middle of a field.
Yeah, Dollar General. So I know they're all over east of the Mississippi. They're all over the
Oh yeah,
Midwest. They're all over the South. I don't know how bad it is for any of you guys west of the Mississippi. So if you want to tell us,
yeah,
that'd be great. But boy, they're a scourge. They
yeah,
they come in, and it used to be the argument that, well, Walmart's putting everybody out of business. There's some truth to that, but there's not
yes,
nearly as much truth as Dollar General is putting local
yeah,
convenience stores, local mom and
hmm,
pops places out of business.
yeah,
They come in, they operate at scale, and
hmm,
there is no way, unless you want Mr. and Mrs. Smith's store to continue,
hmm,
it's not going to.
yep.
And frankly, if it comes down to, well, that gets into a whole nother issue. I was going to say, if most of the county's moving out for other reasons anyways, and if
Yeah,
there's only 5 families left, those 5 families can't support Mr. and Mrs. Smith's store, but whatever.
I can only take you anymore. I could only take you to maybe a handful of places back home that are old fashioned family run general stores. And they
Yeah.
tend to be in very historic areas where the area itself is kind of still supporting them to be there. But if you're out just in the just I mean just in the middle, what most people would consider I don't consider it the middle of nowhere because this is where my family lives, but most people would consider it
Right.
the middle of
Okay.
nowhere. Okay, there's barely a couple hundred people living out there. There's a stinking Dollar General right there, and
Yes.
it's like this is what you talked about, how it's moving the local mom and pop shop out. It's presenting itself as, oh look, we're just the general store for the 21st century. You're not a general store. You're completely artificial,
Yeah.
and you're bringing yourself in
Absolutely.
saying, oh look, we're just kind of the modern time. No, you're not. You're a parasite that's taking over the local community. I cannot stand shopping at a Dollar General. I can't
Yeah.
stand it.
So, Chief Slinging Beef, he makes an interesting comment in here. He says, I'm not mad at Dollar General compared to hotels or gas stations.
That's a
And
whole different thing.
well, and so it is a question. Do
Yeah,
you want to go corporate or do you want to deal with that? I'll tell you the worst one I think maybe is we're talking about Dollar General putting the local C store out of business.
yeah,
However, what happens when mom and pops are in their 60s, they're ready to retire,
yeah,
and then I could say they should have made a better choice on who they sold it to, but
yeah.
whatever. Like the boomers that are selling out to solar farms right now.
Uh huh.
I can understand it. I hate it. I think it's wrong, but I can understand it. But what'll
Yes.
happen now sometimes you'll get the mom and pop's place, they sell to the local Patel, and boy, there seems to be two routes it goes down. Either everybody gets everybody who is not of a certain ethnicity gets kicked out,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and then they start selling lots of kratom and whatever else, and usually over a 5 year span, and 3 different sets of owners or at least main people that were running it, the place just dives, absolutely
Yeah.
dives.
Hmm.
Or sometimes you get it, and there is a they will keep on the local staff, and boy, some of the horror stories that you will hear from the local staff about the new Patel owners and the
Yeah.
ownership group and what goes on. It's not very nice when these places go out of business and
Yeah.
other owners come in. So
So those two gas stations that I told you about where I grew up, only one of them is open now. It is owned by what you just described. And let's just say it's very convenient for when you have to go over and like you're missing something for your Christmas dinner because I guarantee it they're open.
right,
And I have heard my dad say that. Well, what's really, you know, it's like I don't like that they don't observe Christmas because we're Christians and we should observe Christmas, but well, might as well go over there because I know they're going to be open, so might as well give them some business. Like, no, don't encourage it.
yes,
They're,
yeah. Well, that's the part, and I'll tell you another part too is, um, boy, I don't know. Maybe I've just had bad luck, but where I live now,
mm-hmm.
that has gone on with. Well, I've got to drive a few miles to not go to a gas station like that.
Yeah,
But boy, if I don't see a fair amount of health inspector issues every year,
yep.
and
I will.
it is what it is.
This is not in Kentucky. This is where I live now. But I, to this man's credit, I know of one gas station that is owned by someone of that persuasion, and I will say, at least on an individual level, he has done a good job. He speaks incredibly good English. He's extreme. He is his customer service skills are legitimately really good, and he actually does talk to his customers on a very like one to one. Like he's trying to actually get to know us. Like we're not just people to give him money. He has kept on some local staff, and like it's not. It doesn't look like some nepotistic family business. And but he is. That's very much an exception. It's like I
Yeah.
wouldn't judge all the other ones based off this guy. He is extremely rare.
Well, and
But
it is funny. That's the problem they talk about.
mhm.
Starting in the 80s and 90s or whatever. We got the best, and
Yeah,
now we get the rest.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so we had one similar, like you're talking about, somebody that came in and took over the gas station, doing a great job. He
exactly.
was a
Mhm.
he was a good businessman.
Yep,
Problem being, he knew he was a good businessman,
yep,
and so eventually it passes into somebody else's hand, and that guy did all right. He did
yeah.
okay, and then the 2 3 families after him, oh, it's hell in a handbasket.
I know.
So
Yeah,
here we are. And
yeah.
that's unfortunately, I mean, that's not a Kentucky issue. That's
That's
Midwest.
everywhere.
That's the
Hmm.
South. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is what it is at this point.
yeah.
So this is interesting. I mean, not that we were going to turn this into a business stream, but Slinging Beef's in here. He's talking about the folks that originally owned the gas station, the convenience store. They didn't teach their kids to run the business. I
It's true.
think I think there's probably some truth to that. I will also say though that boy, it's when you get outside of the cities, it is hard to convince the kids that this lifestyle, where you
Hmm.
have to drive a half hour to get to a basic Walmart,
Yeah.
an hour to get to a major city. And when I say major city, I'm talking 60,000 people. So it's got the Home Depot, it's got a couple of Walmart supercenters or whatever, but it doesn't have anything interesting for a young kid.
Right.
I think when I got to be an old man, because I'm so old at this point, but when I got to be an old man, I appreciated that. But I also understand when the kid says, "Well, I can stay where I've always been, and I could take over the convenience store, or I could
Hmm.
I could take the business sense potentially that mom and dad gave me, and I can go and apply that somewhere else and make a whole lot more money, have a whole lot more
Yeah.
fun. So,
Hmm. It's a, I mean, it's a real temptation, and it's,
which
you know, it's,
unfortunately, now that yeah, that almost seems like a boy, that could almost be a synopsis of Kentucky to some degree. It's
it is,
harsh, but
it is. No, no, it's not, and it's a play. It's something that could be applied to a lot of places, but yes, definitely Kentucky. Um, I know. Okay, I said earlier, my great grandfather owned an 800-acre farm. Um, I did not know him because he died when I was like 6, and I think he was already 90. And so I did not know him when this farm existed. By the time I was growing up, he had sold off the entire thing. And now it's just a bunch of people's homes and smaller farms along that road. So, like, my grandparents' house was situated on a parcel of the land that used to be part of his farm. And it is the story. It's the story of quote unquote progress, that we're going to continually destroy our farmlands. We're going to continually destroy our heritage land, our homes, in the name of progress, in the name of money, in the name of economy. You know, we sacrifice these things on the altar of convenience instead of maintaining what is ours, maintaining that better way of living. It may not be as economically easy, but it's spiritually better. And which why I'm happy. My grandfather, so on my mom's side, my grandfather has maintained his dad's 400-acre farm, and he still owns the entire thing. And he has had received offers to sell off parts of it, including from my own family. They have encouraged him to sell off parts of it, and it has. I'm very. I mean, saying you're proud of your grandfather is kind of, kind of hubristic, I guess, because it's like he should be saying that about you as the grandson. But he's almost 80 years old, and they'll say, "Oh, you should sell off this part of the farm because nobody's going to use that part and everything." And he just puts his foot down and says, "It's my farm. It was my dad's farm, and I have no desire to sell it. So stop asking."
yeah.
And
Well, and until I fall over, I'll do what I want with it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I know me and my youngest brother, we have both already been, because we're the two oldest grandchild, or I'm the oldest grandchild on that side. And so me and my youngest brother, we've both been talking to him and just been like, listen, we really want to make sure that we try to keep as much of your farm intact. And it's like, if you're going to leave it to your kids, that's fine. But we're definitely going to apply pressure on our parents and aunts and uncles to make sure you don't sell this thing off. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't want to lose our ancestors' heritage. And it's like,
Well, and it's you can have 5 generations, and let me just take a minute and say, because my hobby horse is ag. If
yeah,
you've got a fifth generation farm, and I don't care if it is a feedlot and
yeah,
they are running all the steroids and everything. That's
right,
its own issue. That's its own
sure,
issue, and I have issues with that. But the fact that they've been able to keep that business in the family
hmm,
for 5 generations and that land, and they can grow it out, it is just
yeah,
wild to me that they can do
yeah,
that for 5 generations. And then whatever group, which frankly tends to be boomers and Gen Xers, whatever group
yeah,
wants to say, "No, no, we're good. Let's just sell it."
yeah,
It's mind boggling, absolutely mind boggling. Now maybe there's trust that you can get into stuff. I'm not legal. I don't know any of the advice on that,
yeah. I don't
but
either.
yeah, it's just it is unbelievable to me when you see a family who has made something work, because make no mistake, guys, if even if you are on a second generation farm, let alone a third, fourth, fifth,
Hmm.
they were doing something right for
Yeah,
it to continue on to this point.
yeah.
yeah, that was. I don't know, man. I hope it works out for you. I hope you're able to
Well,
keep something going up there in the state.
he he
Maybe
and I
you
are.
have cattle ranching in your future.
I don't know. Actually, that we were talking about industry. The part of the where I'm. So I okay. This don't I've noticed over the years when I've met people from other parts of the country that this doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, Most other parts of the country, if you ask where somebody's from, so if you say where are you from, I'm from Florida. Oh, where in Florida? They'll say the town's name. They're like, well, I'm from Tallahassee, or I'm from Tampa, or I'm from Orlando. Even if they're not from the town itself, they'll say, or I'm from around Tampa. You know, you may not know like all the little towns around it, but I'm from around Tampa. Kentucky is a little different because if you say, where are you from? I'm from Hardin County. I'm from Grayson County. I'm from Nelson County. And oftentimes I think it's part of probably because the towns are so small, not everybody even knows where they are. But I grew up in Hardin County and Grayson County. So for like the first half of my life growing up in Kentucky, I was in Hardin County. Then we moved over to Grayson County, which these two counties are right next to each other. Where we lived in Grayson County, they actually have a pretty booming honey industry. And so that is something I've thought of is, I would actually like to get it, maybe at some point try to get into that, raising bees and doing honey. And it's a pretty decent sized industry in that town. To the point that our local festival has actually been recognized at the state level it's in the books as a officially recognized festival in Kentucky called Honey Fest, and we do it like every fall. But so just going back to what you were talking about earlier with different industries, that's a very local industry, but a lot of people in that area work for that company, and it's a family owned company as far as I know, and it's been there forever.
Yeah, and so that is one of the interesting things you'll see, and you see it somewhat in the Midwest. I
Hmm.
think maybe I think you might see it a little bit more in the South, where there's almost these niche industries, in
Yeah,
that it doesn't take. It's maybe like you were talking about. It's a county level footprint, and in that
yeah,
county, it's a big deal.
yeah. It
It's
is.
a big employer, and the
Hmm.
family is doing well. Uh, but yeah, it's a fun thing to see when you see something random, whether it is beekeeping or, well, horse saddles. Well, no, there's a place actually, uh, what, in Ohio that does. Oh, they're bigger at this point, but I want to say it's Weaver Leathers, and I want to say,
Hmm.
had been just a small family-owned business up until maybe the turn of the millennium, which is a funny way to
Okay.
phrase it, but
Yeah, it is.
yeah. So let's see the. Oh, that's funny. So, so slinging beef. The Yankees here say they're from Tennessee, and you know they aren't, and they get mad about it. Yeah. So the local colloquialisms and the various ways of framing things, and when,
Hmm.
okay, well, here's one. Actually, tell us an interesting fact, and then I'm gonna pull up something and run through this exact scenario. So you
Telling
go
you an
on about
interesting
Kentucky
fact.
for a minute. Yeah, whatever.
Okay. Okay. Oh, someone. Okay. Okay. So on X earlier today, someone. She. She's an author that I follow. She lives out west, I think. But she was just recently in Kentucky, and she mentioned how she only saw one horse in the whole state, which horses is very much a big thing in Kentucky. Not over the whole state, but definitely around Lexington. Lexington is horse rich. I mean, massive horse farms, and I've shown people pictures of the stables, and people think they're manor homes. That they're so massive. But um, you shared a picture of the castle, which not too many people know that Kentucky has a
Oh,
castle.
that's exactly what I'm pulling up right now
Oh,
to make
fantastic.
this point. Yeah.
Okay, so The castle, which you're pulling up the picture of, it's in a place called Versailles. It's not pronounced Versailles, and if you say Versailles, you're going to get laughed at, assuming they even understand what you're talking about. But yes, it's spelled like Versailles, like in France, but we pronounce it Versailles. And there are some things about the state that, depending on the way you say it, we can tell immediately if you're from Kentucky or not. So if you say Versailles, you ain't from there. If you say Louisville or Louisville, you ain't from here. There are very specific ways we say things. And that's just two examples. It's Versailles and it's Louisville. This is just the way we say it. This is the way we want everybody else to say it too. But I have driven by that castle. It is beautiful. It is very cool.
Yeah, I had to be out. I had to be out that way. I think I was going. Well, so okay, that's another issue with Kentucky. Is it's just funny. You'll drive through there and you'll find different things
Oh yeah.
in the different names, and so the fact that there's a place called Paris, Kentucky, which isn't too far from London, Kentucky.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, which isn't too far from Versailles. It's just it's fun.
Yeah, and that shows Kentucky's roots to old Europe. We were coming from Virginia. Virginia comes from Europe, and so we're pulling these things in. I mean, Louisville itself was named after one of the Louis, the King of France, and so this is what we named. I can't remember which one it was, but we named Louisville after one of the Louis, and because I think France was still kind of contesting control of that area. It was because it was around the time of the War for Independence, so England and France are still kind of butting heads over there. But yeah, it's like this is one of the interesting places. Now, this is not the only castle in Kentucky. There is another place in Kentucky that's called the Castle on the Cumberland, and that is actually the oldest state prison. So if you go to the town of Eddyville, you'll see it's the only maximum penitentiary in the state, and it is built like an old castle. It's not so charming looking as this one though, but people do also refer to it as just the castle.
Yeah, that's that'd be a stream one night just to do it about the architecture involved in prisons. Because wasn't Tim Robbins? I think that was the name of it. Or the name of the actor. Oh, Shawshank Redemption. Wasn't that filmed at an old prison in Ohio?
It might have
Central
been.
Ohio. I think it was.
Yeah.
And that was another one that it's just that crazy built up courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Eddyville still has dungeons.
Okay, fair enough.
It's that old. It still has them. I think even the original sign is still up over the front gate that says "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." That's still up.
Right.
It's hardcore.
Okay, so here's something interesting. So Arthur and Callie first, he says the county shout outs are a Texas thing to some degree as well. And so I do wonder
cool.
I wonder how much of that ends up being if it's the individual European ethnicities or where sort of that comes from, the whole county shout out. But then he brings up another thing that he grew up in a dry county.
Yes.
Tell us about dry counties. What's the deal with those? Because I know Kentucky still has some.
We do. Not as many, but
okay.
Back when I was growing up, depending on whether or not you could buy alcohol in your county was dependent on whether your county was dry or wet, and it was a county seat decision. You would vote for it.
County by county, they would decide.
County by county. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So like Hardin County, where I grew up, Grayson County, Breckenridge County, a lot of the counties in this area, they were all dry when I was a kid. If you wanted, now you could own alcohol in the county, but you could not buy it there in the county. So if you wanted to go buy booze, you had to go over to a neighboring county like Meade County or Nelson County. Or if you wanted to, go all the way up to Louisville and buy it there. But yeah, And there are still, to my knowledge, there are still some counties back home that are dry. Funny enough, when I was a kid, Christian County was wet, so you could buy bourbon in Christian County. But if you went over to Bourbon County was dry. So no alcohol in bourbon, but you could buy alcohol in Christian. So
Yeah,
I always thought that was funny. But
that's crazy. Well, and that's a now that you mention it, that's an industry we didn't touch on too much, but and unfortunately, it's another one of those great mythos portions
mhm.
that people get confused about a little bit. But what's the deal with the bourbon trail and the liquor industry in the state of Kentucky?
From what I understand, I mean, Kentucky is known for its bourbon. I think it would be like Tennessee, and its whiskey. It's I am not a drinker. I've I've never just been into that. So, but I know Bardstown. There's a ton of breweries in Bardstown. I mean, these massive breweries on the Parkway, and they make from what I understand, they make some of the best bourbon, and that's one of their big industries. And I know it's in other parts of the state too. But that's the first thing I always think of when people when people say bourbon. I think Bardstown. That's what they make. But I know it is bourbon is kind of one of those industries that's starting to grow even around other parts of the state that historically didn't have it. It's a moneymaker. So Bardstown's a real
Yeah.
pretty town, by the way. If anybody ever sees it, it's real pretty. So
Well, very good. Well, hey, so we're about an hour 15. I don't want to tie up your whole night, but
okay.
what's been going on? How would you want to put a bow onto the state of Kentucky? And then yeah, do some shilling about yourself, how people could get a hold of you and see different things. Now, I would put your X as you've got a fair amount of Kentucky. You've got a little bit of Orthodox going on. You've got some
Yes.
fiction on there. What's sort of the main thrust of what you've got going on X, and then
Um.
how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me on X at ky squirrel _90. So that's my handle. Um. I never expected to have 1,300 followers. So that was yeah, I never expected that. I mostly I talking more and more about my home state has become more of a um it hasn't always been that way. There was a time I never would have considered moving back home. Several years ago. I It's been the last several years I've really wanted to start. I get every time I go home, I get this feeling of homesickness. Like I want to stay here. I don't want to go back. I want to stay. And I can't remember who it was that said this, but there was a Kentucky writer. It might have been Gurney Norman, but he said every Kentuckian is in one of two places. They're either in Kentucky or they're on their way moving back. That everyone somehow ends up back home, in some way, shape, or form. And that's the place I'm feeling right now. It's like I'm slowly making my way back up there. And my wife and kids, they want to go back up there. Kentucky is home, and it's okay. I'll put it in the perspective this way. Where I grew up about a 15-minute drive from our church, little Baptist church up on a hill. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was the pastor of that church. My dad's dad was the closest thing we had to a deacon, one of the elders of the church. Half of the church was my family. Some of it distant, but it was actually most of the people in there I was related to in some form or fashion. Um, I grew up from both sets of grandparents. I grew up about a 30-minute drive from both sets of grandparents. The business that my mom and dad work for is the one my grandfather owns. My dad's worked there for 30 years. I can take you to where most of my ancestors are buried, including a cemetery in Breckenridge County that has my fourth great grandfather buried there. Kentucky is home. It's where my roots are. So my shilling for it may not mean much to anybody who's looking for some exotic place, some built up place. Kentucky is a it is in many ways an economically depressed state. It's not a wealthy state. It's not a very populated state. It's not what you would consider a really built up and with lots of cities place, but it's home. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of culture. I mean, some of it's so full of history and culture. You don't even have to look for it very far. It's just there. Every small town has something about it. References to the Civil War, references to the founding, references to um, skirmishes and big families and things like that. It's everywhere. But yeah, if you go to my X account, I do talk about Kentucky. I do talk about orthodoxy. I do talk about science fiction and other things like that. I am an Orthodox Christian. Uh, that is not a very big part of the state, obviously. And there are times it does feel a little surreal to be, born out of a Kentucky family that for most of their family history were Baptists, and I worship at a church that is comes out of Syria. So it is it is a little surreal sometimes. But yeah, if any of that's interesting to anybody, I'm at ky squirrel underscore 90 on X. I do talk about Kentucky. I do talk about the Orthodox Church, Christianity in general, and I do geek out about sci-fi stuff. So if anybody's interested in that, you're welcome to come along.
Yep. So your contact information will actually be there in the what you call it, whatever it's called for these streams here on YouTube. And so that information will be
Okay,
there. And if you found us on X, well, then it should be easy enough because you're tagged and all that. Connor
perfect.
Dillon says, shout out to Galaxy's Edge.
KTF, buddy.
And then, yeah, so with that, I'm going to do a little point of order and then we'll log off. But hang on for just a second after we log off,
Yeah.
buddy, because I want to run through something with you.
Okay.
All right. So, hey, having said that, I appreciate y'all tuning in tonight. It is again going back to the very beginning of this stream. I think it would be great for us to have access to something for our guys to be able to jump in and hear about the different states all throughout the union. And I think that would be the best if it came from our guys and it was for our guys and there was a sense of pride in the different things that went on. And so I think one of the great things to come out of this conversation was just how much Kentucky was a transitional state, a frontier state, and now in the 21st century for it to be a state full of history and charm and frankly still some mystery and some myth and
Mm-hmm.
it does its own thing. It's is it the north or south? Well, it's Kentucky. Well, is it
Yeah.
east or west? Well, it's Kentucky.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's going on with the state. Now, with all y'all listen, the point of order that I'm trying to get to next week, I do these always on Thursday. It's going to be Dagum October 30th. It's going to be the night before Halloween. And doggone it, if I can't find anybody to talk to about The Witcher and folk horror and whatever else, I would love to do something. I mean, I'd even do one on the daggum Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown. But in particular, I'm trying to find somebody that's really good with horror. So if that is you and you're listening, or if you know anybody who could just talk about horror. Now, when I say horror, I didn't do the whole Freddy Krueger Halloween and all that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
boy, folk horror just was an absolute worm into my brain. And I'd love to run through that
Yeah.
next week. So if I can make that happen, I will. But otherwise, I don't know. I'll figure something. I'll pull some rabbit out of the hat for next week. And on that note, I appreciate everybody showing up. Mr. Squirrel, this is a great conversation. Hey, go to
It was good
Kentucky.
talking.
Check it out, guys. It's a fun state. All right. And with that, we are going to end the stream and sign.